Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. Dear Family will explore many angles of mental illness, including isolation, drug addiction, and even suicide. Sounds like fun, huh? Well, you'd be surprised, actually, because once we get so invested with Rachel's guests, we can actually relate to many of the issues that naturally arise during her conversations, and what often follows is a knowing laughter. So yes, expect tears of heartfelt empathy, but don't be surprised if you chuckle now and then. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
My guest today is Mikkel Bondesen, a superhuman, ironman, triathlete, and extreme mountain biker. He's the CEO of Fuse Entertainment, a successful management and production company located in Hollywood with a client list comprised of A-list writers and producers. Originally from Denmark, Mikkel is a world traveler and an impeccable dresser with a great sense of style. Mikkel has an adoring and beautiful wife, 2 awesome teenage sons, and the cutest French bulldog you've ever seen. If you're lucky enough to be invited to his gorgeous mid-century modern home, you will experience some of the most beautiful sunsets and the best views of Los Angeles. Mikkel is an adjunct professor at USC and is the founder of the Young Storytellers Program, a nonprofit inspiring creativity in children through the art of storytelling. To the outside world, Mikkel is Superman, a man of steel, but on the inside, he struggled with an invisible illness. His kryptonite was anxiety and panic attacks that often go hand in hand with depression. But Mikkel stared down his enemy and won. Welcome, Mikkel Bondesen. Hi, Mikkel. Thank you so much for being a guest on Dear Family. I wanted to start by sharing my first impression of you when I met you 4 years ago, and our kids were just starting 6th grade. Mikkel, you're really tall. How tall are you?
I'm like tapping 6'4".
Oh, okay. Well, that's over a foot taller than me. And you were wearing a sports coat over a fitted t-shirt and Bermuda shorts with designer suede loafers without socks. And you were really friendly and you just oozed this confidence with your Euro style. And you just, stood out to me. And I want to know what it was like growing up in beautiful Copenhagen, Denmark.
Well, first off, thank you for that. I do recall that first day of school pretty vividly. And, and I do get grief from people for sometimes wearing a sports jacket and shorts. But
I love it.
You know what? It's LA. It's like, whatever, it's 80 degrees and I try. So I'm glad that I didn't offend you at least wearing that.
No, I love it. Yeah. And speaking of LA, you're actually driving right now.
Oh, yes. So I'm driving in Los Angeles. I'm actually on the 101, which is, one of the lifelines going through the city. So I apologize for any ambient noise. But yeah, no, growing up in Copenhagen, it was a different time. I'm 47 years old. So at that time, Copenhagen was not the major sort of world metropolis that it has become now. And to me, more than anything, it was just home. And I grew up in, the heart of the city, what would be categorized as sort of, I guess, quote unquote, the inner city, which at that time was not as fancy as it is now. So I had sort of, I guess, a very traditional middle class upbringing. We were sort of a very liberal and progressive family. I come from a long lineage of architects, which I think most Danes, I almost feel like they do architects and designers. But, my mom was an architect and her father was an architect and his brother was an architect and their dad was an architect. And my dad was a defense lawyer, a public defense lawyer.
You know that my dad's a public defense lawyer. That's so funny.
He was, and he was apparently a very good one, too. So, and they were very active on, my mom specifically, they're very active on the sort of like cultural scene, which at that point in time in Copenhagen obviously was very small. So, my childhood was spent sort of like being dragged to gallery receptions with my parents, hating every minute of it, apart from the fact I got to hang out with my cousins and play hide and seek in all these different museums while our parents were getting, slightly hammered on aperitifs and hors d'oeuvres.
Love it.
Sort of like if I look back, my childhood in general, it's interesting because it was sort of like, it wasn't an easy childhood, right? And the big part of that is that my dad was an alcoholic. And that sort of really, of course, colored the experience of growing up. Now, I should add to this that he was a wonderful person. I was very lucky that my dad was never an abusive alcoholic in any way, stretch of the form. He was a bundle of love. But, alcohol was just more important to him because of the disease than anything else. So, it was not a picture-perfect childhood by any stretch of the imagination. But then again, I don't know if anyone has that. But, for me, it was home, and it was I'm a pretty optimistic person in general. So, and, Copenhagen the inner city was my playground. We lived in an apartment, so we would use the town parks as our sort of playground. So I have a deep and very personal connection growing up to Copenhagen that way.
Well, Copenhagen sounds beautiful. Why did you leave?
That's a great question. So I never actually sort of planned on leaving my hometown permanently because it's an awesome city. And as I became a teenager and then a young adult, it really was an awesome place to be and grow up. But I first left home when I was 17, first time around. I went to boarding school in Wales, my own choice. My sister told me about a really, really awesome boarding school over there where I could finish high school, do the last 2 years of Danish high school. So I thought it looked amazing, and I decided to head over there, move out of my house, live at this boarding school, and I had 2 incredible and very formative years. It was also a very, when people say the word boarding school, they think of sort of like very strict and very sort of like classic. But this was also, again, a very progressive, very liberal international boarding school, which really suited me, high academic standards. So I loved that. And I came back to Denmark, and I worked in Denmark for a few years. I should say I tried my hand at going to college right after high school, and I did not enjoy it. It was not for me. The college experience was not something I needed. But then later in life, I wanted to get an education. And I was in the film business, so I wanted to go to film school. And I did not have the opportunity to go to film school in Copenhagen. I didn't get in when I applied. So I began to look elsewhere. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was moving to the US to do a year abroad. And I decided to go with her. And I applied to a bunch of different film schools in the US, and I got into all of them. And then I chose the one that was in Los Angeles. Originally, I went here to follow a girl, but ultimately we ended up breaking up, so I just went for school.
I love it. You went to AFI, right?
I went to the American Film Institute, 96.
Amazing, amazing. Mikkel, you immediately came to mind as the perfect guest for Dear Family after I read your Facebook post. It was so honest and vulnerable. And you talked about how you had your first panic attack while doing an ocean swim while you were training for an Ironman.
Yes.
And how little by little it crept into other areas of your life, like when you were flying or driving. And I just want to quote you. You said, the worst part about anxiety isn't the panic or anxiety itself, though it's damn horrible. It's the feeling that you're a failure and you're being robbed of happiness by yourself. That was just so powerful. Can you explain a little more?
Yeah, 100%. I actually think sort of that my real first panic attack occurred probably maybe a year prior to the panic attack in the open water, but I just didn't know it was a panic attack. Right. I didn't know that until later. So I was sort of falling asleep, and all of a sudden my heart was racing. I felt like my heart was going to jump out of his chest, and I just didn't know what was going on. Like, I was just like, what the heck is happening? And went to the doctor to get an EKG and stuff like that, and everything was fine. And he said, oh, you probably had a panic attack. And until then, I didn't know what that was. But anyway, so I had a panic attack, in the middle of the ocean down by Manhattan Beach. Obviously, it was terrifying. The worst part about anxiety is really this, that there are times, or at least there were times in my life when I was standing and about to do something, which I knew I had the physical ability to do, right? So like, I knew intellectually that everything was fine. But right. There was this part of me that prevented me from doing it, that this part of me, this fear prevented me from doing it. And that feeling of knowing that you should be able to do this, but you're not, it's a terrible feeling. It is a terrible, terrible feeling. And really, can unfortunately generate a lot of self-hate. Because you know that this is something you're able to do, and you know that you've done this before, and you know there was a time in your life where this was not a problem, and all of a sudden there's this thing in your life that is preventing from doing things that can sometimes be very basic, and that thing is you. Right?
That's really
The thing is not external, the thing is you. And that is a terrible, terrible feeling.
Yeah, it's crippling because it's your own mind that's kind of beating you up. You are the definition of an extreme athlete. You've completed 2 full Ironman races, 10 half Ironmans, countless triathlons, running races, trail races. You've won mountain bike races. You've been named the All-American Triathlete several times. You've qualified for the U.S. Xterra Champs. And this is the thing that I can't even believe. You've jumped out of an airplane 142 times. You've also knocked out your teeth and broken your clavicle and your ribs and your shoulder blade. So clearly you step into fear. But what happened on that day during the open water swim? I mean, I think most people listening to this would be terrified to do anything that I just mentioned that you did. But of course, open water swimming is going to be terrifying. But what happened to you?
So the actual thing, and I think this is sort of like, now that I've spent a lot of time working on my anxiety and healing my anxiety. So the incident, that occurred was I was out it was a Sunday, I believe a Saturday or Sunday, and I was out there's a sort of a group ocean swim in Manhattan Beach where you swim from one pier to the next. You swim from the Redondo Beach Pier to the Manhattan Beach Pier, which is about a 2-mile swim. Very nice swim that I'd done a couple of times before. And there's a big group of people that go and do this swim. And at that point in time, I was very fit. I was probably training for an Ironman. And I was very fit. And a group of us went out swimming, and we're just swimming along, and usually you're sort of swimming in a little group of people, but I was just fast. And you're about 300-400 yards out from shore, typically is where you're swimming, and then you swim along the shore. And I was swimming and swimming and swimming, and all of a sudden I sort of looked up, and I just couldn't see anyone. I mean, I had outswum my group completely, and no one was there. And all of a sudden, my mind just went, dude, you're in danger. Right? That was sort of where my mind went. And then the anxiety just came. The moment that sort of happened, was sort of off to the races. Thankfully, there were 2 guys sort of came swimming along a little bit later, I don't know how long. And I sort of said, hey, you got to help me get into shore. And they swam me into shore. And, the moment they showed up and we started swimming, I was fine. But from that moment on, it was sort of like Pandora's box was opened, right? And I had experienced something I had never experienced before, which is this intense anxiety. This fear of a situation, which was something I had never experienced before. And once you've sort of experienced that fear, because another person, might be in that situation and they might go, oh, wait, I'm all alone. And they may go, all right, hang on a second, let me just see where's somebody. Oh, there's somebody over there. I can swim over it. But, that's not how I interpreted it, just like immediate danger. My lizard brain just went bananas.
Right. It's sort of irrational.
Completely irrational. You're taken over entirely by your lizard brain.
Right.
So that's what happened. And once that sort of sensation had occurred in my life, I became highly aware of that sensation. And then once you're aware of that sensation, here's what happens, Rachel, is that as you walk around in life, there are many, many, many times during the day where we will experience small sort of like anxious sensations. We'll just experience. They just happen to us, right?
Which is totally normal and human, right? We all do. Yes.
All of us.
Yeah.
The difference is, from that moment on, I interpreted those situations as something dangerous. Like from that moment on, something had been rewired in my brain, right? Literally, that moment on, my brain interpreted that anxious sensation like this means danger. So whenever that anxious sensation showed up again, or thoughts showed up again, I would be overcome with anxiety. And because it shows up many places in your life, it began creeping into other areas of my life. So I began having just terrible anxiety when flying, because I would get anxious, which is normal when you're flying, that you get anxious.
Yes.
But then instead of just being anxious, I would then go, oh my God, this is dangerous. This is wrong. My body would just automatically release tons of adrenaline in my body, and then I would be having anxiety attacks. That was it. That was the day that, that Pandora's box was open.
I know you've said that there's no silver bullet for anxiety, but you feel like you have found a cure through this technique called DARE. Yes. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think I should say that anxiety is an unbelievably
complex.
Yeah, a super complex issue.
Yes.
Right? To begin with, I just lived with anxiety for a long time because I didn't even know that it was there. I just lived with it.
Right. So awareness is a big help.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah, but I didn't even get the awareness.
Right.
Right? What I would do is I would just manage, right? So I would just manage my life. And I would just sort of like force my way through things. I would just sort of like try to suppress whatever thoughts I had, right? So I didn't even know that this was an issue until quite a few years into the process when finally I was doing a race in Laguna and I couldn't do the race. I just couldn't do it. I stood on the beach and the sensations, I was so afraid of having an anxiety attack in the open water that I literally packed up my stuff and drove home. And in the car on my way home, I just had enough. I had enough of anxiety sort of like ruining my life. That's when I began. And then it even took a few years from then to the point where I am now. So when I say, I just don't believe that there is a silver bullet to anxiety. And I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way.
Oh, definitely not. There's a road to recovery, right?
There's a road to recovery, and it's individual for each person, and it takes the time that it takes and so forth. And a big part of, as I dove deep into this, a big part of it is a lot of people just want to get rid of the anxiety because it's so uncomfortable. They just want to get rid of it, right? What is the thing that I can do? The thing that I can take? The thing that I should eat to just not have it anymore? And
to mask it and cover it.
Just get rid of it. Not have it. The problem about that mindset is that you will not be successful with that because having anxiety and being anxious is a part of life. So you will never get rid of it, right? And the sooner you sort of just realize it's just a part of being human, that's when my recovery really began to kick into high gear, was the moment I truly realized that, you know what, this is just a part of being human. Like, it's fine. You can have anxiety. You can be anxious. It's okay. And that is something that I got particularly from this. I was very lucky that I stumbled on this book called The DARE Response by an Irish author by the name of Barry McDonough. And I downloaded it on an audiobook and I listened to it in the moment. I was like, oh, this is it. I just knew this was it. For me, that was just it. The technique was just so simple. I was like, this is it for me. And then it took a long time of actually applying the technique and learning it and having to go through different things to get to it. But that is what ultimately has changed the trajectory of my life.
Well, that's great. I love that. And for my listeners to hear that there is an actual simple technique is encouraging. I know that you recently went on a mental health diet for 45 days as an experiment to see if by changing your habits and focusing on your mental health, it would not just affect your anxiety, but also help your general well-being. I'd love to hear about what you did and the results.
Yeah, so I started out with a 45-day sprint. I started in August. On August 26 in 2018 is when I began my first 45-day sprint. So it all started because over the summer, I had the full breakdown finally where I was like, I'm sort of like not a mental breakdown, but I just had this very, very deep conversation with my wife about my anxiety. And we got really clear as a couple about how destructive anxiety was, not just in my life, but also in our relationship, right? So we had this amazing talk, but that really sort of brought into focus just how debilitating it was. And a big part of it was that, when you have anxiety, one of the problems, at least I've experienced and I've heard a lot of people experience, is that your mind is constantly racing. You're either constantly worrying or you're constantly scanning your body for anxious sensation. Like your mind is going nonstop. And my wife used to say to me, where we're having dinner, and she said, "You're not present. Like, can you just please be present? Like, why are you not here? You're thinking about something else." And I didn't even know that was what was going on, because I got Rachel after so many years of being that way. Of course, I didn't even notice, right? When we were traveling that summer, it became apparent that what was really sort of like what was driving a wedge between us to some degree in our relationship was my anxiety. So at that moment on, I was like, all right, I have to make some drastic changes. Clearly, I'm not out on the other side. So I did a lot of reading, and I decided that my sort of approach to this was that, what should we say, the health and wellness industry around sort of losing weight and looking good is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? So the desire to look good is a desire that is, huge, vast empires have been built on top of that. But sort of this desire to feel good, not by medication, but actually taking care of your mental health the way you take care of your physical appearance, is much less appreciated. And I did an experiment which I said, well, if I were to treat my mental health the way that I would treat an exercise regimen or a diet, like literally I want to lose weight. And in this case, it was like, I want to feel better, right? I want to lose weight in 45 days. In my case, it was like, I want to have a big transformation mentally in 45 days. So I looked at it through the exact same prism as if I was put on like Jenny Craig or something like that, right? And then I just sort of cobbled together this quote unquote diet, which was just made up of all the things that I'd read that really have an effect on mental health. So I'll just run through a couple of them because it was a very extensive list to begin with. But, I've employed a meditation 2 times a day times 20 minutes, and I do mantra-based meditation. So I'll repeat a mantra. So I employed that 2 times 20 minutes every day. I cut out alcohol and anything that, I don't do drugs, so I didn't have to stop that, but I cut out alcohol. And my thought behind that was I didn't want to have anything that could reduce me being present in life, right? I want to feel everything. I didn't want anything that numbed it. I cut out caffeine because caffeine is a bad thing, can make you very anxious. I cut out sugar because sugar can do the same thing, can spike your blood sugar and make you feel anxious. Of course, tons of exercise, vigorous exercise is key, No, but it is. So there are several studies that prove that vigorous exercise are more efficient than antidepressants when treating depression. I think those were the highlights. I also did cold showers because I wanted to get used to feeling, because sometimes if you take a cold shower, you get shortness of breath, which can imitate a panic attack, same feeling. So I was like, I got to just feel it and know that I'm okay. And then I also started swimming. That is really great
advice.
Yeah, and I started swimming 4 to 5 days a week. I was like, you know what? I should also just the water all the time because that is my kryptonite, right? So those were the things I did. There was a bunch of other things. And 30 days into this, I just looked at my life and I was like, can we swear on this
of course.
Podcast? Is that,
yeah.
Okay. I was like, holy shit. I was like, I feel amazing.
Wow.
And by amazing, here's what it was. My general level of anxiety had just fallen by magnitude. So you know how I talked about the fact that my mind was always racing? It wasn't racing anymore, right? So just my general level of anxiousness was just reduced by, I don't even know how much. I was more present in life. Like my wife would comment on the fact that I was more present in life. And I was just beginning to feel better, right? Just
and
beginning
I
to
think
feel.
also when you're present, you're happy, right?
Most
Because
likely.
you're not, your brain isn't caught up with worrying about the past or the future. You're just in the moment. And how amazing to be present, but also feel physically well. Exactly. That's so great. I love it. I know you've known Sabine, your beautiful wife, since you were 18, and that she followed you to LA knowing no one. And speaking of beautiful photos, you take the most beautiful pictures of Sabine when she's laughing and looking radiant. And I love how you capture your love and her beauty. I want you to know, I think it's very romantic and aspirational.
Thank you.
You've written about how you actively choose one another every day, which is just also so romantic and poignant because we have to kind of make that decision. Can you explain that to me?
We face tons of choices on a daily basis, right? And we're always hopefully trying to choose things that are good for us. And I think it is the exact same thing in a marriage, right? I do think like, when I wake up and I look at my wife, right? There are days when I feel good and there are days when I feel bad. And there are days when my love for her comes out just through every fiber of my body naturally. And there are days when I'm grumpy and it doesn't. That's why the choice, I think, is really important, because at that moment, I can't expect my love for my wife to be an automatic thing, because it's not. If you think that being in love and loving someone is something that just occurs, I think you're going to fail. You have to generate love for someone, right? There will be times when it's natural and it's just coming out. But most of the time, you have to look at that person and you have to say, this is the person I want. I want this person more than anything else in life. And then what happens when you make that choice is the love actually comes out. I think there's a psychological term for this. I can't remember what it's called. But this act of actually, when you choose someone, then actually what follows after is the love comes out. So we both operate from that, and we do choose each other all the time.
And I don't know what the psychological term is. I just think it's also kind of gratitude and realizing, counting your blessings, right?
Yeah.
So I know that you like to journal. And,
yes.
As a writer, I have found that reflecting on my past and just reflecting on my present thoughts is cathartic and valuable. I'm curious, do you share your writing with anyone, and do you write in Danish?
So the answer is no, I don't share my writing with anyone. And it's not because it's chock full of secrets or anything like that, but it is because specifically with the journal, I write for myself. I have sort of specific things that are just journal. Actually, part of that 45-day diet, I was also journaling every day, just about my well-being and celebrating my successes, which of course reaffirmed my successes in relationship to anxiety.
So like a gratitude journal.
It was the gratitude. And I was just sort of like pointing out the successes, right? We spend so much time, and specifically when you're struggling with anxiety, you're spending so much time beating yourself up over why you have anxiety. So I had to flip the switch, and I had to write about all the great things that I was able to accomplish in spite of my anxiety, to prove that anxiety was not running my life.
I love that.
So I was doing that for a while. Now I journal much less, right? And I'm actually doing that as an experiment to see if, can I function without journaling, right? So when I journal for me. I don't journal for anyone else. And I don't share my journal with anyone. They can look through it, as there's nothing in it that's secret.
Is it in English or Danish?
And I write in English.
Uh-huh. Oh, I love that. And, I think if we spent the same amount or more time celebrating our victories at the end of the day, rather than beating ourselves up about the things that didn't happen or we didn't do, we would just feel so much better. And I think we all have to be reminded to focus on the positives, because we often overlook them. 100%. So speaking of writing, can you tell us about your nonprofit, Young Storytellers?
When I moved to the U.S. back in 1996, I had a pretty amazing screenwriting teacher who unfortunately has passed away. During one of our classes, we talked we talked about the public education system here in Los Angeles, because she was a very active member in the community in terms of promoting arts education in public schools in LA, which unfortunately, due to budget cuts, have been severely trimmed back. And I remember sort of in our conversations, because when I grew up, Rachel, I was not a particularly traditionally academic kid. I wasn't bad, but I also just wasn't good, right? And my mom and dad were divorced. And there was a period of time when, after the divorce, where things were really rough for me. One of my teachers, my Danish teacher, I think she sensed that something was going up. And I just seem to remember that when the other kids were writing essays about very specific things, she sort of said to me, you know what, you just kind of write about what you need to write about. So I would write these essays where I would fictionalize the events that were occurring in my life, right? Because it was a turbulent time. My dad moved into a neighborhood that was really bad, and I had to go see him, and it was not a very safe neighborhood. It was not very nice to be chased by the local gangs and stuff like that. Although, albeit, at least they were Danish gangs at that time, so not, it's a little bit different. But, it's not nice having the threat of getting beaten up or, hanging over your neck. So I would fictionalize all of these events, and I would do really well. I would just do really well in class. And I just remember sort of that the difference that made to me. And I started thinking about the frankly that my childhood in Denmark growing up there is pretty privileged compared to the childhood that a lot of the kids were going through in the inner city in Los Angeles. But a lot of these kids didn't have this outlet, right? They just didn't have this place to talk about it. So I said, I'm going to do something about this. So I rallied a couple of my friends from AFI and I said, hey, listen, I have this idea. I want to do a program for kids, a storytelling program for kids. I don't know what it is, but I just know that I have to do this. Can you help me? Together, the three of us sort of cooked up the basic conceit for the Young Storytellers Program, which is a mentoring program. And all that goes on, it's very simple. You basically have 10 adult writers. They don't have to be writers back then. They were just 10 mentors. And each of them get paired with, typically it's 4th or 5th grade. And they meet once a week for an hour for about 8 weeks at the school, during lunch. And the kids basically spend about half an hour learning about story, but not really learning, just playing with story. And then they spend half an hour telling story that the mentors will then write down. And by the end of the program, they will each have written a small screenplay, about 8 to 10 pages, which is based entirely on whatever they want to tell a story about. The mentors will typically type it up, but the kids have really written this story. And then we will get all these sometimes very famous actors, sometimes not famous actors, to come down to the school, and they will perform for the friends and family. They will perform the kids' play in front of their parents and friends and everything. And
Wow.
It is just pure magic. It is one of the most incredible things when we do that. And the kids walk out of there like, just 10 feet taller after the fact.
How amazing and how empowering for them to see their story come to life and that they have a voice.
Yep. It's been hugely successful. I'm sort of not actively involved in the program anymore just because of my schedule, but the organization thankfully lives on very, very well without me.
That is incredible. What a beautiful seed you planted. Mikkel, if you could write your younger 20-year-old self a love letter, what would you say?
A love letter. Not just a letter, but a love letter. Well, first of all, thank you for asking that question. And that is actually a brilliant question, Rachel. Seriously, I actually think so. Because in my journey to heal my anxiety, one of the things that I have learned from others is that one of the core components of healing your anxiety is developing an ability to love yourself. So people who struggle with anxiety a lot, one of the main themes is that they do tend to develop this incredible self-hate. I mean, really deep, which unfortunately in some cases can lead to depression. In other cases, unfortunately, can lead to suicide. Just because you just can't fathom that, you just feel so weak, right? So this hate develops. So if it's a love letter, I would sort of say right to my younger self, I do think one of the first things I would say to myself is, listen, you deserve to be loved. Right? You deserve to be loved because you are very special and you are unique and you deserve to be loved just the way that everyone else deserves to be loved. So I do think that this idea of a love letter is a brilliant idea. So I would probably write myself that. I would spend some time thematically on that, how important it is to love yourself. And then I would tell myself to chill the fuck out. You obviously opened by sort of like listing that list of things that I have accomplished. And while I am happy and I'm proud of everything I have accomplished in life, you know what, like at the end of the day, things I'm most proud of I've accomplished is like I'm the most proud of looking at the family that I created and the life that I've created for us here as an immigrant in this country. And that's not tied to my athletic success and it's not tied to my business success or any of these other things. So I would just sort of tell myself I had a lot to prove when I was younger. And I'm sure that also played some part in sort of this drive for perfection, also played a big part of developing anxiety in my life. So I would tell myself to chill the fuck out and just remind myself that it always works out. Like it just does always work out one way or the other.
That's so great. And I definitely agree with you about the self-love and the gift of family. Okay, so can you explain and tell me if I'm pronouncing this properly? What is hygge and do you practice it?
Oh, hygge?
Hygge.
Yeah, hygge. All right, so hygge is a Danish word.
Yes.
Which has no direct translation into the English language.
Okay.
Which is why everyone refers to it as the Danish word hygge.
Okay.
And hygge is a very, very, very important part of Danish culture. And what it is about, it has an explanation because there's no one word that can sort of like directly translate it. It is really about being present in the moment, enjoying and savoring that moment, which is typically a moment with others. It can be a moment on your own, but it typically is a moment that involves, other people as well. And hygge is about creating the atmosphere that makes that possible. So typically in Denmark, when it is something, an act that you do, it's not like an official thing. It's just like, you just say, oh, wow, this is hyggeligt, is what you're saying. It will involve lighting candles, sitting down, conversation, being present. That's typically what it involves. So it is all about, hygge is when you have those moments of being present with other people, and it typically involves sort of like, you involve external factors that can make that presence available. That is what hygge is.
I love
and
that.
Yes,
it's kind of like mindfulness.
It's very, very mindfulness. It really is. And it is really about savoring the moment in the company of others. That is what it's about. Not sensory overload. Actually, it's the opposite. It's typically stripping away stuff that can be overload and getting into the core of what makes it enjoyable to be around with other human beings. Sometimes it involves alcohol, not copious amounts, but alcohol, candles, and deep conversations to be what you equate it with. And yes, we do practice it at home. And I think we just do it because we're both Danish. So I just think it's in our DNA.
I love it. And you have such a beautiful home. Mikkel, what is next for you?
Well, coincidentally, I'm doing a race on Sunday.
Oh.
So I'm going out to do an off-road triathlon on Sunday. And I'm really excited about it because it'll be the first time that I'm swimming in open water since July of last year. And it'll be the first time that I'm swimming in open water since I've been on this mental health diet that, by the way, has not stopped since August. Like, I'm still not drinking alcohol. I'm still meditating every day. So it's the first time that I'm actually going out into the ocean, or well, in this case, it's a lake, to swim and race. And I am so excited because I'm excited to now actually put all of these tools that I've been working on for the past 8 months, put them to use. So that's what's next for me, is going out there and having fun in the open water with, 200 of my closest friends. So I got that coming up this weekend. And I'm sort of looking at that actually as because I think healing anxiety is there's no destination. It's sort of an ongoing journey. So I'm just looking at this race like it is another opportunity to experience anxiety however it wants to come along and manifest itself. All I'm doing is practicing for the next time I'm going out in the ocean and my anxiety shows up. So for me, it's just going to be more practice. It's all about the practice of healing.
I love it. And it's like you're embracing it.
100%. And that, by the way, is, for those of the audience that will begin picking up the Dare book, that is one of the key tenets of healing your anxiety, is completely allowing your anxiety to just let it be.
Owning
just
it.
Let it manifest.
Yeah.
Let it manifest how it's not going to hurt you. It's going to be uncomfortable as all hell, but ultimately you're going to be fine. And then other than that, I'm just going to continue doing my work, which is, one of my biggest passions. Is I'm very lucky that I do what I do for work. So I'm just going to continue doing that.
Great. And for our listeners who want to be inspired by your athleticism and your incredible photos of your world travel, where can they find you?
My Instagram handle is mbondesen, so it's my first initial and then last name. So it's MBONDESEN, and that's it.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing all your beautiful photos and hearing about your triumphs. And I am so grateful that you came on Dear Family today. And I know you will inspire so many to just step into the fear and know that they can get through it.
100% they can. It's not a life sentence by any stretch of the imagination. Yes. Not even close.
Well, thank you, Mikkel. Say hi to Sabine, and
I will.
And lots of love to you.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank Benjamin King for his heartfelt intro to Dear Family, as well as for helping me produce this podcast. And thank you to Ari Silberman, our audio engineer and composer. This is Rachel Steinman, and let's be close friends, like our families we choose. For more information, or to contact me with any questions or comments, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing Dear Family. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.